Suddenly, the figure sitting upon the golden throne began to rise, elevating above it, beginning to what appeared like levitate. The golden cloak that hung from all sides around these thick golden shoulder pads and helmet, completely cloaking the form beneath it. But as it levitated off of the throne, a bright golden light could be seen emanating from underneath the robes as it lifted itself from the throne and began to float down towards Delius. Not rapidly, or in any measure of haste. It moved smoothly, slowly, as if it was under no pressure or time constraint whatsoever, like taking a leisurely stroll, only in this case a leisurely float down to Delius, lowering itself to the ground directly in front of him. As it did, Delius got a closer look. He still couldn't make out who or what was underneath, but based on the level that the eidolon and the cloak that now hung to the ground stood at, it was actually shorter than him, by at least a half a foot. "So, you are the false god, Delius," the figure said as it came to a stop in front of Delius. "And you're their shiny golden god, right? Solari, was it?" "You are incorrect. Solari is the name of the gods themselves. There are many of us. But individually, my name is Mozarako. I tell you this only because I am amused. It seems you possess strength uncommon amongst the mortal kind. However, you now stand before a god. So, I will give you this one opportunity. Kneel before me and relinquish your foolish ideas of struggle and defeat or victory. There can be no such thing against us. Do this, and I will spare you and your people, and give you, an unworthy mortal being, place within the Solari as our soldier. Refuse, and you will be destroyed. You may now choose," the figure said, floating just a small bit above the ground, that little golden glow emanating from it as the cloak around the figure billowed. "Wow, I really gotta say, that god complex is something else. You really think that I'm just gonna bow down and do whatever you tell me to? Sorry, but I've never bowed to anyone, unless it was a short show of respect, like the elders. But it's by no means a pledge of servitude. You aren't going to get me to be bowing anytime soon, and the people of this system will not be bowing either. I don't know what ownership you claim to have over Hagara, but it is my homeworld. And whether it's eventually going to wake up and eat this entire solar system or not, that's not changing. It's you who has no claim to something that my people have lived upon before this solar system ever began. So, do your worst. Let's see what you got, God. Or was it Mozarako? Yeah, I forget. A whole lot of God rambling. I don't suppose it matters," Delia said, staring intensely down at that stoic golden eidolon face in front of him. Ugh, that mask creeps me out. I don't suppose you have an actual face under there, do you? Something a little less unsettling? At this point, all of the representatives for the Solari were staring on in astonishment or horror. Most of them getting on their knees and trembling, beginning to pray amongst themselves. Everyone, leave the chamber. All except the false god Delius are to be gone. Do not harm anyone. They are to bear witness to the falling of their false god and see what remains. The voice bellowed out from that stoic figure standing in front of Delius, as all of the people in the room began to be ushered out, which the Solari representatives were more than happy to do, obeying their god's orders without question, as the doors behind them locked shut, leaving only Delius and this stoic figure in front of him. Do you have any last words that I might pass to those who will see you after your defeat? Nah, I think I'm good, Delius replied, staring back at him. Let's save that last word nonsense for someone who's actually concerned that they're going to be his last words. Very well, the figure replied. Then it shall be nothing, and to nothing you shall be. As suddenly, the cloak surrounding the figure began to billow, and as it did, Delius felt a warmth rush out, as if there was a warm breeze in the room, something he hadn't experienced in some time. Normally, outside of his own planet, he never really experienced a temperature change. Surely enough he could feel the breeze, but whether it was hot or cold was anyone's guess. He had even been in environments that were said to be cold, yet it felt nothing like the winters of his homeworld, feeling no more than temperate. And the same could be said for hot environments. But for the first time, Delius actually felt a warmth as the cloak billowed in front of him. Well, that's a nice breeze. Is that how you're gonna kill me? A nice breeze? Delius replied, as suddenly he began to smell something. Smoke. As he began to look about, he saw the clothing on his body beginning to catch fire. Lifting his arm and seeing that the shirt was burning away rapidly, as all of the clothing that he was wearing was doing the same. What in the... Oh, no, Delius said as he started trying to pat the fire out, to absolutely no avail, as within a few moments the entire thing caught fire, an intense flame that burnt it all away to nothing, as Delius's sword clattered to the ground, with nothing to hold it up. Oh, you got to be kidding me, Delius said, looking back up towards the figure. Okay, now I'm naked, he said, beginning to shake his head, covering his face somewhat. Ugh, you know those clothes were a gift, right? A friend of mine got them just for me. Had them sized and everything, Delius said, as the figure stood unflinching. Only the cloak moved as it began to billow far more intensely, and so too did the warmth filling the room. Delius could now see the walls beginning to change color, the golden texture seeming to fade as everything became a dull orange coloration, glowing as if it were all red hot. And as he looked at the figure in front of him, so too did the flowing cloak and helmet and shoulder pads adorning the figure in front of him begin to glow a bright red. Okay, well, that's new. I mean, I get the helmet, but what's with the cloak? What's that made out of? How durable exactly is that? Because I've been looking for something to make clothes out of that can, well, actually hold up. So far, as you can tell, with no luck, Delia said as the billowing of the cloak grew even more. Suddenly, the cloak itself seemed to melt away, floating into beads of what looked like molten red-hot metal, floating away from the form as the helmet began to melt away as well, as the wind and the heat seemed to intensify more and more every passing second, all of it seeming to melt and dissipate away, the heat in the room growing, the walls themselves seeming to eke it, as the entire covering for this figure melted away, an extraordinarily bright light emitted from underneath, so bright that Delius began having to cover his eyes, shielding them from directly looking into it, at least for a few moments while his eyes adjusted. And as they started to, from beyond that now melted away figure, and what felt like an intense heated wind flowing out, Delius could now see the form that lied underneath, long flowing red hair, and a glowing red body to match. But what was most surprising was that the form itself seemed feminine, the body of a woman, except this one seemed to be made out of fire, emanating wind and heat in all directions as she floated in front of him, the whipping of her hair growing more intense as the gusts of wind grew more intense as well, and on her face, an expression of anger. More and more, the wind burled out in greater amounts, greater intensities, so much so that the walls themselves, as hardened as they seemed to look, began to melt away. Explosions rang out from the golden-armored soldiers that began to detonate in the walls. Everything was burning, melting away. As Delia stood there, even the ground below his feet, the once pristine carpet that was there, had burnt to nothing. Below it, the hardened metal melting away, turning to slop beneath his feet, that he sank into like mud as he began to start having to pull his feet out of it, finding new places to station himself in order to keep from sinking, as the figure in front of him grit their teeth, now looking absolutely enraged. "Okay, this is getting a little bit ridiculous," Delia said, looking to the side as he saw his sword starting to sink into this molten metal as well, having to scramble over and grab it before it sank. No, that's mine," he said, picking the blade back up, holding it and putting it on his shoulder as he went back to place, standing in front of this billowing figure, giving her a cross expression. "Are you done yet?" Delia said. "This is starting to get inconvenient. Extremely inconvenient," he said, as finally the flow of air from the woman started to die down, as the fury on her face seemed to fade into what looked like astonishment, as the whipping of her hair slowed to a gentle waft. "What are you?" she said, looking at Delius. Now the deep voice from before, gone, replaced with a far more feminine one that seemed to match her current state. "I already told you, I'm Delius. Now if you're done with the parlor tricks, is there going to be a fight or not? Because please don't tell me this was your attempt to kill me. If this is the best you got, then you're sadly out of luck. I have to tell you, as far as temperature goes, this is a warm summer day on my home planet." Unfortunately, the rest of the universe doesn't seem to be able to handle it, which does make a lot more things make sense. But still, the point remains. A warm summer day ain't gonna kill me. So, others did survive. I expected only the Solarians to make it, but it appears that another god race has survived, the glowing figure said, as the glow seemed to subside even more, diminishing, fading away, as suddenly this glowing figure that seemed to be made out of nothing but energy, like the surface of the sun, or a sun, suddenly began to seem solid, as if skin was growing, forming from nothing, the hair becoming normal, the body taking shape, as if it were flesh and blood, as it stopped floating, touching down to the mushy, molten metal surface below, squishing into it the same as Delius, just not to the same degree. She seemed to be a bit lighter. But there she was, in full form, and just as naked as Delius. It has been some time since I was able to look upon anything but a Solarian and see anything but an insect. But it is clear to me now that you do possess godly right. You are not a false god. I apologize for my mistake and give you my greeting, she said, as she extended her hand towards Delius. Well, I suppose so. Fine then, Delius said, as he extended his hand as well, clasping hers. I guess it's nice to meet you.